Last night I went over to Houston Baptist University. There was a debate held there between John Mark Reynolds, who is the provost of Houston Baptist University. His background is in philosophy from the University of Rochester. I think he has a PhD in the way he described it was analytic philosophy. And then there was Dan Barker, who is the president of Freedom from Religion Foundation. And he is a very well-known advocate of atheism. He, I think, has a national radio broadcast in which he presents his views. He's written books against Christian belief and about his journey leaving Christianity. He was formerly a minister in some kind of, I think, non-denominational or Pentecostal type church many years ago. And in the mid-'80s, somewhere around there, he left his Christian faith and embraced atheism. John Mark Reynolds has written some books, expressing his sort of philosophical beliefs within the context of Christianity. He seems to be interested in apologetics, philosophy, Christian thought in relationship to philosophy, and now he is responsible for the academic world of Houston Baptist University. I heard about the debate about a month ago. I received an email, someone advertising the debate, and it is close to where I spend much of my life teaching, and so I thought that I would go over there and see what was said and watch the debate. When I enter into these kinds of debates or watch them or go to them through the years, I've been to a number of debates. I don't make it a big habit to go to them or to search them out, but when they are close at hand or when I'm invited to be a part of something like that, I'll sometimes go. From the time that I was very young, I enjoyed listening to debates. I found them interesting and informative. I think the main value of such a debate is this, is it allows you to see in a single evening what are probably the most important ideas for those particular speakers, the things that they would want to say if they could talk about the subject. They present them to you, the most important things that they have. And you're able to see those things exchanged and engaged and discussed and pressed in front of you. When I really love to watch a debate is when you have two really informed people who know a lot about a subject, who engage or clash over the issue, and you're able to be involved in that exchange and that discussion. That doesn't always happen. In fact, much of the time it doesn't happen. When most of the debates that I listen to through the years, I'm disappointed with them when I walk away from them, and the reason why is because you end up having at least one of the persons, sometimes both of them, who are engaging in a debate, and they're not really familiar with what the other person is saying, or they don't know exactly where they're coming from. And so what you find in much of the debate is an effort to try to understand what the other person is saying, when they could have already discovered that, perhaps by reading their books or by being more involved in the discussion as it's being carried on. But in any case, I'm oftentimes disappointed with the results of these debates, but they are informative in the sense that they do highlight the things that they think are most important. And also it's interesting to watch the crowd dynamic. How do people respond to the speakers, and what do they get out of it, and how are they moved by it, and what impression does it make on them? There's lots of different things that I could say about debates in general, about the positives and the negatives of it, and I think there are plenty on both sides of that. I think debates for most people are probably not the best way to learn, in the sense that they're not really prepared for that kind of discussion, and they don't really follow the points very well, and the exchange of ideas. For some people, they're very helpful because they're able to see that kind of pace and movement and ideas that are presented to them. I think what we would be making a huge mistake, though, if we think that the whole of the discussion could be somehow encapsulated in a single conversation. In other words, if a person went into a debate like that saying, and I think very rarely does this happen, by the way, but if a person went to a debate like this and said, in the next hour and a half or 2 hours, I'm going to hear two people present on an issue, and this will allow me to decide once and for all, forever, what the truth of the matter is. If a person puts that kind of emphasis on those few moments, I think that's very, very unwise and unfortunate. Because this is just a little snippet of a much larger conversation. The persons involved in the conversation might not even be the best representatives of them. Maybe the points that are being presented are being unfairly presented. Maybe the questions that are being raised are not fair questions. There are lots of problems, I wonder sometimes when I listen to a debate like this, how many people in the crowd really understand the finer points that are being made. I wonder sometimes how many people walk away confused or they don't understand what they've heard. Oftentimes when I talk to people who attend these debates, or people as I'm walking out the door, I talk to them, oftentimes they do express that. Do you know what they were talking about, or what did they mean by this? And so oftentimes people have a very hard time following exactly what is being said. I wonder sometimes whether the time is sufficient, whether or not the way that the debate is being carried on allows you to really get into it. I have some books around me somewhere that are transcripts of debates that were held, maybe a century ago or more. And some of these books are many hundreds of pages long. I have one that's a debate on the subject of baptism, all of the nuances of Christian baptism between two different, very informed Christian ministers, and the book itself has to be at least 1,000 pages long with very, very small type. And the debate was held over weeks of time. It wasn't a debate held in a single evening. It was held over a very long period of time, in which people could, over an extended period of time, see how each speaker understood on a much deeper level the subject, rather than just seeing it in an hour. I think sometimes in our world we're so used to things being fast. We want something short. We want someone to get to the point. We're so quick to do that we often miss the deeper dimensions of the subject that is being discussed. And so I wonder sometimes about the time limitations of these debates, whether or not they allow for serious understanding of the subject, or whether or not they're just little snippets or just talking points that are being presented without any clear understanding or appreciation of the subjects that are being discussed. I wonder also, when I enter into a debate like this, are the speakers qualified to carry on this kind of conversation? And I mean by that not just having academic credentials or recognition, public recognition, or professional recognition. I wonder sometimes if the person that enters into the debate is really prepared for what they're going to experience there. Debating is not just like writing a book, or it's not like teaching in a classroom, although sometimes the classroom is very much like a debate. But when you have two people that are presenting a position in a very narrow window of time, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity to explore all the different questions that might arise, and there's also a premium placed on rhetoric, on skills of communication, on crowd manipulation, or crowd, sort of dynamic in the discussion, where you're trying to persuade a group of people, because it's very much a persuasive context, a debate context. There are all kinds of methods that are used to try to win the crowd, or to perhaps insult your opponent's ability or position on a subject. And sometimes that overclouds, or sometimes leads to various logical fallacies of different sorts, where you might, for example, subtly, or maybe not so subtly, imply that your opponent doesn't know what he's talking about, so as to win points, not because it's really the case that they don't know, or not even because it's even relevant to state that. The crowd should be able to draw the conclusion whether or not a person understands something. For me to try to insinuate a person doesn't understand, or for me to try to tear down my opponent in some way. And also, another thing that I often see in these debates is that a person uses the tactic of throwing out so many things in the presentation that it's impossible for the other person to adequately respond to them. That happens very frequently as well. In any case, I think in this particular debate that I watched last evening, there's a lot of room for criticism, and there's also some very positive things, I think, that came out of the discussion. And I'd like to highlight a little bit of that in this presentation, and in maybe one or two subsequent presentations. So let me start with, I'd like to begin my reflections on this debate, and I offer these just for anybody who may have watched the debate, or anybody that cares about such discussions. To perhaps what I have to say here will inspire you to want to go watch the discussion, and perhaps what I have to say here may, for a few people that actually attended the debate, perhaps may be of benefit as well. And then for those that don't care about either, maybe there are a few topics that will come up in my summary of the debate, or my summary of certain points in the debate, that perhaps will be helpful to you. But let me just make a quick series of observations about Dr. Reynolds, the Christian representative, the theist in this debate, a few of his points. First of all, he very much emphasized, Dr. Reynolds did, he very much emphasized throughout the evening the importance of clarity, of logical rigor. He's trained in, he said, analytic philosophy, and therefore he said that it's very, very important that we get away from pop theology or pop atheism. Meaning by that, just what goes on the street, or what goes on in everyday throwing around of arguments, we need to have clarity of thought, and we need to have rigor of attention given to the details of the discussion to make sure that we're asking the right questions, and that the things that are accepted as legitimate answers are things that we have great assurance that they are good questions, good answers, and have a method of determining that. The second point that I would make is that he made was to highlight the limits of science. That science is not an end-all. It is not the answer to everything, that it can't answer certain questions. And one of the ones that will become relevant during the course of the evening is Reynolds emphasized that morality is a major area of human experience that science cannot give to us the guiding principles that we need. Science tells us what is the case, but it can't tell us what we ought to do. It can't tell us what the grounds of moral conviction is. Now, this will become a point of great controversy between the speakers during the evening, but that is one of the points that he made. I also noticed during the course of his presentation that he is deeply committed to principles of Platonic philosophy. By that I mean, and it's a kind of a complicated thing, and on other videos that I've made, I make some references to Plato and talk a little bit about Plato. But the gist of it is this, that Platonic philosophy holds that our experience as human beings shows that reality is made up of two distinct realms. One is the realm of sensory experience, and that's what the scientist focuses on. But there's also the realm of what Plato would call the world of the forms. The world of the forms is accessed in the mind. It focuses on eternal truths, spiritual truths. And he focuses on things like mathematical truths. Often I'll use geometrical examples. He didn't use geometrical examples last night. Reynolds used numbers as his primary example. He asked whether numbers truly exist, and the atheist said no, they don't exist because they are realities of minds. So things that exist in our minds are not things in the sense that they don't exist out there. They are simply constructs in the mind. And if there were no minds in the world, if there were no human minds, if the universe had not resulted in the evolution of minds, numbers would not exist. Because numbers, of course, are objects of the mind. And what Reynolds is arguing is that when human beings discover mathematical truths, or they discover numbers, we can assume that any logical mind or rational mind anywhere could come to understand that 2 + 2 = 4, for example. And so to know that 2 + 2 = 4, or to know what number 1 means, these are not physical realities. They are mental objects, or they are rational objects that we know in the mind. And so what Reynolds argues is that we discover these realities by thinking and through the mind. We discover them. If we discover them, then that means that they already exist, that they're already there. Our mind is simply tapping into them. And so what Plato would do with this is to say that because we discover in the mind certain realities that cannot be reduced to matter or to the material world, it follows that reality is composed of more than just the material. It's composed of the immaterial or the spiritual, the mental, as well as the physical, and that those two things cannot be collapsed into each other. I thought that this was actually one of Reynolds' stronger points in the night, is making reference to this. I don't think his presentation of the point was particularly effective. In fact, I think it was lost on most people in the crowd as to the exact point that he was trying to make and what its implications are. But I do think that it was a strong point, and I think that if we listen very carefully to what Mr. Barker said in the debate, that we'll see that this was, I think, one of the stronger points for Reynolds. Let me make another point or two because I'm running very short on time in this presentation, and I'll finish Reynolds in the next presentation. But after dealing with numbers, I would say that he emphasizes very much, he talked a fair amount about the mind-body distinction, and I think he did a decent job showing that the mind and its objects, thoughts, have properties or attributes or characteristics that physical reality does not have. And I thought he did a decent job showing that point. Again, he emphasized morality as an example of something that cannot be reduced to science, and I thought he did a decent job of that, although later in the debate I think he was a little bit caught off guard, at least as far as I could tell, by some of the things that Barker had to say in response to this. Then I think I need to save the rest for the next presentation because I'm going to run out of time.